Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get started. So, welcome to the last in our lecture series for the semester and the academic year, the last event of the Institute of Turkish Studies. My name is Sinan. I am very pleased to welcome today a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Akin Unver, who is a faculty fellow of Foreign Affairs with the Department of International Relations at Kadir University in Istanbul-Turkey. Prior to this position, he was the Ertegun Fellow at the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University. Dr. Unver has also been a Jean Monnet Jean Monnet Joint Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Michigan Center for European Studies and the Center for the Middle East and North African Studies, during which he published the widely cited and the first English language article on the topic, Turkey's Deep State and the Ergenekon Conundrum. Dr. Unver has assumed teaching positions at the University of Essex and Sabancı University in Istanbul, as well as policy research positions within the European Union Secretariat General, the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Eurasian Center for Strategic Studies and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He holds a PhD in International Relations from the University of Essex in the UK, where his dissertation, Defining Turkey's Kurdish Question, won the Middle East Studies Association's Malcolm H. Kerr 2012 Award for the Best Dissertation in Social Sciences. And that's enough from me. Dr. Akin Unver, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being here. I see that interest in Turkey's Kurdish question is quite amazing at this point, because yesterday I was doing a lecture at Princeton on an entirely different topic. You would expect that the future of Turkish-Iranian relations would gather, a larger crowd, but basically typical of Princeton, you had maybe 17 people. But I mean, everything in Princeton is so small. Like, you teach a lecture, you teach a course, it's just 4 people. But this is really amazing. Today I'm going to talk about Turkey's new peace process with regard to resolving its Kurdish question through peaceful means. Turkey has been going through a Kurdish issue, or Kurdish problem, or Eastern issue, or Eastern problem, depending on which discursive context you look from. Practically, this new peace process, I refer that as version 2.0, because like a new software, it updates upon the previous, original release, and tries to modify main segments of the earlier release. Now, version 1 of the Kurdish Initiative, or the peace process, took place through late 2009. Basically, its intellectual and preparation period began in 2009. And it went through for September to October of 2009. Ultimately, it had failed. Now, basically, in my dissertation, I was looking at what the Kurdish question is. You would expect that a question like the Kurdish question, it's such a saturated field of academia. You have thousands of papers, dozens of books about it. So probably asking what is Kurdish question is not really a good question. But in fact, I realized that that is one essential question that people had absolutely no idea about. When you talk to Turkish people regarding what is the Kurdish question, if you ask 10 people, all 10 would basically give you a different interpretation and a different definition of the Kurdish problem. When you ask this to Kurdish people, to 10 people, all 10 would provide you with a different answer. So briefly about my original research on the Kurdish question, that issue, that thesis, was based on my research on Turkish Grand National Assembly, European Parliament, and United States Congress, including Senate and the House of Representatives. I surveyed through a 10-year period of all Turkish, American, and European debates and discussions on the Kurdish question from 1990 up till 1999, that's 10 eventful years, during which I started to see some patterns with regard to a person's political ideology and how that ideology would define Kurdish question. So, for example, one pattern that emerged is that, for example, a hypothesis. Can we argue that politicians who subscribe to a political right position, be it Islamist or be it conservative, religious or nationalist, can we argue that that person is more likely to define the Kurdish question as a national security and terrorism problem? Likewise, can you argue that a politician who subscribes to the political left, liberal or leftist ideology, can we argue that that politician is more likely to define the Kurdish question as a liberties and emancipation issue? So the research basically confirmed that to some extent. Yes, Turkish people, American people, people meaning legislators and European legislators, politicians, definitely look at the Kurdish question from ideological perspectives. If a person belongs to political right or political conservative political spectrum, then it's more likely for that politician to define the Kurdish question either as a national security problem or as a terrorism problem, or basically lack of education, underdevelopment, and general backwardness of the region kind of problem. When you look at leftist politicians or liberal or libertarian politicians, there is a great pattern emerging. An overwhelming majority of those politicians define the Kurdish question as a human rights problem that belongs to Turkey, an essential democratization problem, lack of civil and legal liberties problem. So that's basically my origin point. When you're trying to resolve the Kurdish question, you have to understand that all solutions of the Kurdish question have to emerge from one or another position, another focus of political ideology. And that's why, if you're a center-right or right-wing political party, you essentially approach the Kurdish question from the priorities of center-right and generally exclude the priorities of center-left or far-left. Likewise, if you are a left-wing political party, center-left political party, you ignore all aspects and components of the items debated within the context of political right. So Turkey has been, fighting this war against Kurdish insurgency since 1983. It is regarded as a general milestone period when the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, began attacking Turkish military positions. For Turkey, 1983 is the origin point of this conflict. From 1983 up until 1990, you have a period in which the Turkish state kind of struggles to contextualize what's actually going on with this new insurgency. And they, in fact, lose a lot of military ground to the extent that paramilitary Kurdistan Workers' Party begin attacking Turkish military positions in open battle, not insurgency methods, but basically, methodical, open field battle kind of way. Another milestone is the first Gulf War, 1990-1991. Then Turkey's president, Turgut Özal, was a very, close American ally, and he believed in the general rationale for NATO. And Turkey at that time, 1990-1991, it was struggling with trying to find itself a new identity within the context of post-Cold War politics. There was a big debate in Washington. Is Turkey still an ally? Should Turkey still be an ally? Why do we need Turkey in NATO? So Gulf War was basically Turkey's answer to that question. You still need Turkey because you still have a lot of stuff to do in the Middle East. And see, you have to go to Iraq, and the biggest airfield outside of the United States in the world is in Turkey, in Incirlik, and you have to use it. There you go. So that was the answer given by the Turks to this new post-Cold War identity, foreign policy identity of Turkey. Turgut Özal allowed NATO air assets to use that Incirlik air base, which was seen by Saddam Hussein at the time a clear act of war, a declaration of war. even though Turkey did not fight with Saddam, just simply opening up Incirlik Air Base in Adana to NATO jets was seen as a belligerent act. Now, Saddam, this is one of the least studied and least understood aspects of that period. Instead of attacking Turkey or launching a missile, which is basically its effect is short-lived, Saddam Hussein actually decided to redo what it already did in the Anfal massacres, during which there were gas attacks, a large number of Kurdish, Iraqi Kurds had died. So Saddam's policy was to attack northern Iraqi Kurds once again, this time not to destroy them, but push a large number of Kurdish refugees into the Turkish-Iraqi border and just give the PKK an inexhaustible recruitment pool. When you look at the CNN footages from that period, from Gulf War, on the Turkish border specifically, you would see that there's a massive refugee crisis. And refugees, by definition, is an ideal breeding ground for extremism, because they're desperate, because they lost their homeland, and especially younger members of that refugee community, younger male members, are easier to recruit as opposed to more urbanized or settled communities. 1991 onwards, you see the PKK membership actually expanding about 8 to 10-fold, which also expands the range of PKK operations in Turkey by 8 to 10-fold. From 1991 onwards, PKK, from this struggling kind of paramilitary / parliament in exile body, it becomes an all-out nationalist revolution, leader of an all-out national revolution. It is able to basically provide purified water to some villagers. 1991 onwards, it's able to basically pen down its own legal code, enact its legal code, establish local municipalities. So 1991 up till 1994, you really have this rising period of the PKK. From 1994 onwards, Turkish-American strategic partnership basically expands into very serious arms trade, such as infrared equipment or modernizing F-16 fighter planes, which basically allowed Turkey to gain the upper hand vis-a-vis the PKK. And from 1995 up till 1999, you have a gradual fallback of the PKK and gradual, gains of area of the Turkish military. The whole episode ends with, many of you would know, Turkey threatening to make an incursion into Syria. PKK's leader Abdullah Öcalan was in Syria in 1998. Turkey threatens to invade, and actually one armored division actually passes through the Syrian border and marches to Damascus, after which Father Assad decides to oust Abdullah Öcalan from Syria, after which Öcalan goes to Russia, from Russia goes to Germany, Germany to Italy. On the way, with American help, he is found in Kenya, in Nairobi, in the Greek embassy. And from that Greek embassy out, he's basically seized and handed over to Turkish security personnel, and he's brought back to Turkey. And since then, he's in this Alcatraz-style island prison of Istanbul called Unver. Now, 1999 up until 2003, you have a gradual period, you have a relative period of calm. PKK enters a period of interregnum. There's leadership infighting because the main leader, founder and leader is no longer there. There are different factions. There are factions who are still loyal to Abdullah Öcalan. There are factions who want to push for a clear separation of territory, more radical nationalists. You have more ideological leftists that argue basically maybe they should stay in Turkey, but there should be autonomy, and that autonomous region has to be, some sort of socialist entity. So you have several separations within the PKK, and from 1999 to 2003, you have this gradual period of interregnum. Enter the Second Iraq War in 2003, after which Turkey is hesitant about the entire, principle of war. Should there be a war to start with? Nobody likes Saddam in Turkey, given what Saddam did to Turkey in 1999. But nonetheless, I'm sure all of you will know that everybody had the same worries. It will destabilize Iraq. It's going to create a long-term infighting. It's going to end up strengthening Iran and Iranian influence. So that's why Turkey didn't really want to support American efforts. It was reluctant. There was a March 1st, 2003 parliamentary bill, as a result of which Turkish parliament denied American troops being stationed in Turkey. Then, naturally, for the United States, that northern front became the KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government. And instead of, trying to mend the ties with Turkey, the American government then decided to replace Turkey with the KRG and exerted very strong influence over the autonomy of the KRG. In that phase, the PKK, whose main base is at the intersection of Turkish, Iranian, and Iraqi border, a very big mountain range, massive mountain range called Kadir. It was stationed there, and from there, PKK managed to regroup, rearm, and it began to resolve its leadership crisis. And by 2006, under the consensus leadership of Murat Karayılan, it's a loose understanding of leadership, but nonetheless, 2006 onwards, you have PKK attacks resuming against Turkish military targets in Turkey. Now, 2006 to 2009, you have this gradual increase in PKK attacks in Turkey. Now, in 2009, Abdullah Öcalan, in his island prison, comes up with this idea. He realizes that this new leadership structure of PKK actually leads to a decrease in the Unitarian legacy of Abdullah Öcalan himself. And in some ways, to bring himself back into the agenda, he makes, totally out of the blue, a declaration saying that I'm going to propose a peace plan for the resolution of the Kurdish question in the coming months. Nobody was expecting him to do it, so nobody saw that coming. But the government, Justice and Development Party, as well as the state security services and intelligence services, agreed on one thing. We have to preempt Abdullah Öcalan's peace plan, because if his peace plan works and it's a good plan, he will get all the credit and we will have to follow basically in his footsteps. So we have to preempt Öcalan's plan and come up with Turkey's own proposal for a peace plan. And 2009, early 2009 onwards, you have presidential, prime ministerial, and high-level governmental statements related to, that peace process isn't important. What's important is our peace process. Don't listen to that. And these statements eventually created a momentum with a lot of emotion, but very little substance. Turkish government basically agreed on the fact that they had to preempt Öcalan. But Öcalan was preparing for this peace plan for quite a long time, and the government had no idea what Öcalan's peace plan was. So they basically created a makeshift process. And there were certain, for example, priorities. So how is Turkish government going to resolve this issue? One, some sort of autonomy. Kurds don't want to break away, so some sort of autonomy is the solution. Now, some sort of autonomy is becoming the wild card, or like the buzzword of Turkey's Kurdish question, because all sides somehow agree on, okay, there has to be some sort of autonomy, but autonomy is such a big thing that what specific aspects of autonomy will there be, a separate legal code for that, a separate security service for that, or will taxation be local, or will it be, national? These, questions weren't really answered in those debates, and basically, the process began on Turkish government's end, a series of very symbolic incidents. So one of the most important aspects of those symbolic events was that they were supposed to convince some PKK members in the mountains to disarm and come and settle into Turkey. It was a very publicized event. But on the other hand, Kurdish nationalists, and especially the Kurdish political party at the time, realized that this entire process is about preempting Öcalan's plan, and it's also marginalizing Kurdish nationalist position. And so a lot of Kurdish nationalists thought that, this is Turkish government's game, and we can actually increase our bargaining capacity if we do not really follow this peace process at all. So they actually decided to make this process unpopular, not among the Kurds, but among the Turkish public. That became their primary strategy towards the peace plan. And with that, those PKK members, some of them, maybe it was like 30 people, 40 people, it was a small number of people. But as they were coming down, the Kurdish political party portrayed this entire process into, the ultimate victory of Kurdish nationalism in that sense. So that portrayal would certainly annoy Turkish public opinion, and it will sharply reduce the support that Turkish public felt towards this peace process. And that was an excellent calculation. When those PKK members came, they were greeted as war heroes, which is a scene that was very allergic to Turkish public opinion. When they came in that fashion, it got broadcasted in all major news channels. And as a result of that, you have protests, Turkish nationalist protests against the peace process. And eventually that process, 2009 peace process, died in 2009. Now, enter Arab Spring. Arab Spring actually affected Kurds that are, of course, not Arabs, but nonetheless, that uprising and the sense of revolution significantly opened the eyes of the Kurds. And among Kurdish factions, the leader of the more radical nationalist wing, led by, you don't have to know his name, Cemil Bayık, for example, he proclaimed in 2010 an all-out people's revolution against the Turkish government. That 2010 all-out revolution against the Turkish government was a decision, a movement that was shaped, not 100%, but 99% by the Arab Spring and Arab revolutions. Kurdish nationalists wanted the same kind of implosion to happen in the Kurdish provinces of Turkey. And they argued that by symbolically increasing the attack rate of the PKK on Turkish military targets, they would be able to create this emotional momentum that will lead Kurdish people to launch a similar uprising. And indeed, 2010 and 2011 gradually became two of the most violent years with regard to, Turkish military losses and number of PKK attacks. To the extent that from the fallout of 2009, by late 2011, you had this new, public perception saying that, fine, let's, talk to them, let's sit at the table and discuss what we have to, give up if we have to give up, and what concessions we actually have to make. Now, today many Turkish nationalists say that let's not sit with them. We still have fight left, in that sense. But based on my personal opinion, which is shaped based on my interviews with active duty and retired military people from Turkish armed forces, is that basically they see this not a fight between the Turkish military and the PKK, which has 5,000 or 6,000 operatives at any given time. Turkish military sees this as the fight between Turkish military and a transnational Kurdish nationalist awakening in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq, and in Turkey. And practically, the fact that the PKK actually fills out its, lost, its casualties, people, militants who die in battle, it can really, replace them very fast. The reason why PKK is 5,000 people is that that's the best number that enables, proper command. It's not that they can't be 10,000. They just don't want to be 10,000. They want to be 5,000 because they become, fast and accurate in that sense. It doesn't blow the decision-making system. But when Turkish military realize that, they do a cross-border operation, they kill about 2,000 PKK militants, but then 6 months later, you have 2,000 new people replacing that lost casualties. And Turkish military realize that this is an unending game, because when you look at where these, replacements are coming from, it's basically Kurdish people, Kurdish refugees, or, dislocated, relocated Kurdish refugees in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria. And practically, that's why, especially, by 2010, 2011, Turkish military realized that we're not really fighting a group of 5,000 people, we're actually fighting 25 million Kurdish refugees in that sense. And when you are fighting with 25 million Kurdish refugees, that basically will soon spill over into a civil war between, 60, 70, well, I don't know how much would come up when you subtract Kurdish population from the Turkish population, because national census don't get conducted in that way. But nonetheless, the military basically came up with the acceptance that if we pursue, the armed struggle in that sense with the PKK more, then it's eventually spill over into civil war. And neither the military nor, even the most nationalist, the radically nationalist people in the military agree on the fact that, a prolonged war will lead to civil war. So that's why it has to be dealt with in a political way. And if there has to be a concession made, it has to be, of course, calculated. But that political process issue basically came up with some, consciousness emerging within the military. And then you have this new version 2.0, what I call Kurdish peace process. It basically tries to build upon, it doesn't try to build upon the defeat of the first one. It basically dismantles the first one and builds an entirely new structure of peacemaking in that sense. Here, you have more, for example, taboo issues, such as, for example, discussing whether Abdullah Öcalan should be released from prison and put into house arrest. Should there be a local militia or security force of the Kurdish provinces? So it's really a game of hardball now. The political debate is revolving around issues that would not be even, mentioned or, put into political discourse about 10 years ago. And in that sense, one calculation, domestic calculation, is that Turkey in version 2.0, I don't know if this is going to be the last version or whether there's going to be a version 3.0 later on, but version 2.0 basically operates from the hypothesis that Abdullah Öcalan, even though Turkish people absolutely hate him, he is the main interlocutor between Kurdish nationalism and Turkish state. And that's why Turkish state realized that it can actually pull Abdullah Öcalan to a consensus middle ground that will also be not too difficult to sell politically by the Turkish government. And when they realized this, and they basically, you can basically see this, I don't know, it's a recent thing, but there was a group of Kurdish politicians who visited Abdullah Öcalan in his island prison. And Abdullah Öcalan conveyed a written message to those people. And that text was actually leaked into the press and it became public. When you look at that leaked document, you basically understand that Abdullah Öcalan is really talking from the same perspective as the Turkish state apparatus, in the sense that, for example, he says there won't be a separation, but some sort of autonomy, again buzzword, some sort of autonomy should be given. And that's basically kind of the reluctant consensus in Turkish security apparatus as well. Of course, separation and breakaway cannot be accepted, but some sort of autonomy. What some sort of autonomy doesn't matter. We'll just discuss it after all these things are done. Another thing, disarmament of the PKK, and PKK leaving its main base, stronghold in the Kandil Mountains, at the intersection of Iraqi, Iranian, little bit Turkish border. They will leave there, and PKK assets in Turkey will go elsewhere. Now, where are they going to go? Some people argue that they should be sent to Europe as political refugees, asylum seekers, but there are just too many. I mean, you have to negotiate that with the EU to a great extent. So in version 2, you have a bolder approach on the one hand, and definitely more governmental enthusiasm. Now, this is the visible part of the iceberg. There are several issues in the invisible, bottom down side of the iceberg, which is actually larger, and they determine the parameters of this peace process. One of those parameters is this. Arab Spring showed Turkey that if you do not reach some sort of democratic and constitutional consensus with a movement that large and that radical, then it is going to create all sorts of problems that it created in Egypt, in Syria. So that's why basically easing that kind of transition through political means and through debate is basically #1 priority. Arab Spring and what happened in Arab Spring, specifically what's right now happening in Syria, is one of the primary determinants of why Turkey is so bold and so not enthusiastic, but so willing to make concessions with regard to the Kurdish question. That's why they debate all the taboo issues, such as getting Abdullah Öcalan out of the prison and putting him in house arrest, you wouldn't be able to talk about that about 5 years, 6 years ago. Right now, it's public debate. I go to the grocery store in my neighborhood in Istanbul, and the grocery guy's like, "Oh, professor, you're a political scientist. Should he, go out of the prison and go under house arrest?" I don't think so. So that's like the main debate right now you make with the bus driver, this simit seller, and your grocer. And basically, when you talk to normal Turkish people, person on the street, one thing that strikes me is that actually how receptive they are to the idea of Kurdish self-administration unless they stay within the borders of Turkey. And I'm also very much surprised by how receptive they are with regard to, for example, one of the main Kurdish requests is that changing in the constitution the definition of Turkishness, rather than portraying Turkishness as an ethnic identity, Turkish citizen or citizen of Turkey term is what the Kurds want rather than Turkishness. And to many Turkish nationalists, this is basically fueling separatism. But people don't really think that way. Some people do, of course, but some people are like, of course they are Kurds, they are not Turks. If they want to be called Kurds, we cannot put Kurd in the constitution, but a middle ground can be, instead of Turkishness, you can say Turkish citizen or citizen of Turkey, and that wouldn't really be a separatist thing, because when you look at early Republican period in Turkey, Turkishness becomes a confessional issue. Your ethnic background may be something entirely different, but citizenship and confessional modes of self-identification is basically that. So that's why that debate leads to constitutional change, and that's why it's such a toxic issue. In order to make sure that what's happening in Syria doesn't happen in a smaller scale in Turkey, that debate somehow, leads to that constitutional change and what Turkish citizen is in the constitution. There are also other items such as Turkey already started to give green light to Kurdish radio channels, TV channels, education in Kurdish, reverting Turkified names of towns and cities back to Kurdish. So they're already, that's already in process. Other more serious aspects of it, will the Kurds be able to defend themselves in a court in Kurdish rather than Turkish? Language, legal language. There is, work on that, definitely. The second thing underneath that big iceberg, how much time do you have? What time is it?
5 or 6 minutes.
5 or 6 minutes?
Until Q&A.
Okay. No, I don't. So, and the second thing is, basically, I sense, and many people sense, that resolution of the Kurdish question means basically resolving the most existential and the most chronic issue of Turkey. It has been around since modern Turkey was established. Now, you have this big legacy on the one hand. Secondly, Turkey right now is debating whether they should switch from a prime ministerial presidential system into a full presidential system, similar to that in the United States. Now the government backtracked on that, and they're thinking about a semi-presidential system. What's a semi-presidential system? Doesn't matter. We'll just talk after you voted for it. So, Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, is the ideal case of power maximizing powerful, centrist political figure. And his main legacy, the legacy that he wants to create, is that he wants to be the executive president, head of the state, as well as the chief decision maker. And he wants to assume the title and the prestige of Atatürk elected by the people. So in Atatürk's case, you have a Republican face, but because at the time you have Republican system as the most representative system. Now, right now you have modern democracy, free, fair elections, multi-party. So Erdogan wants to be the Atatürk elected by the people in a fully democratic multi-party system. That, to him, is everything. What Erdogan is doing, why he's getting so angry, why he's lashing out to people, it's because he wants to retain a large body of the electorate who would support him in case of a semi-presidential or presidential election. And his argument is that secular modernists will never vote for me, and there's nothing I can do to gain their votes. What I can do is that I have Muslim conservative and Islamist votes. They're going to vote for me regardless of whatever. Now, I have liberals that are neither Kemalist nor Islamists. They're like progressive liberals. I can maybe, convince them to vote for me. And in that sense, in 2009 Kurdish peace process, Erdogan tried to do this basically from a Turkish nationalist position. Sidelining Kurdish nationalism and the Kurds, and approaching the issue from a purely Turkish political perspective. Now, that alliance is broken. Erdogan right now is marginalizing Turkish nationalists, trying to get the support of the Kurds, and basically become the semi-president or president elected by Muslim conservative, Islamist, and Kurdish votes, and completely, ousting or sidelining the original center. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with famous Turkish sociologist Sherif Mardin, or Sherif Mardin's thesis on center-periphery relations. His argument is that basically all Turkish societies, I'll stop. This is the final thing. This is 2 minutes. I can sense Sinan getting nervous. So basically, he argues that Turkish Republic was established by a strong modern secular center, covered by a strong secularist bureaucracy, and outside of that political system, you have a periphery, and periphery are those that are ousted from the values of the center. So Kurds, those who do not self-identify as Turkish, those who do not self-identify as secular modernists, are basically those who make that majority periphery. Now, Erdogan basically wants to take that periphery, move together with them into the center, and become the central value system of the new Turkey, and then oust the former secular modernists, secular nationalist components to the periphery. In some ways, he wants to be the Atatürk of the new periphery. And those two, domestic considerations are running in Erdogan's mind. And that's two main reasons why this new process, version 2.0, is more credible than version 1.0. We don't know whether it's going to happen or not. We don't know if Erdogan is going to say, well, I don't really get the support I demanded from the Kurds, so I'll just try to convince Turks this time. So basically, this Kurdish process is closely linked to next year, 2014, municipal elections versus presidential election. So whether Kurdish process is going to work or not, we're going to see in 2014, but right now, version 2.0 is much more ambitious and much more comprehensive than version 1.0. So without annoying Sinan further, I'll just stop here.
So I guess the floor is open for any questions. Could you please identify yourself by name and affiliation and speak loud and clear, because he has a microphone, you do not.
Yeah, I think it was first. Yeah.
Yes, Jeremy Walton. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. Thank you for this provocative and timely discussion. I think we can all agree that it has sparked a lot of thoughts that deserve further discussion. I have two sort of comment questions. The first, I think you actually got to at the very end of your presentation, although framed in a certain way as Erdogan's own political ambition, and this phrase, the Ataturk of the new periphery, is one that will certainly stay with me. But I guess looking beyond Erdogan's specific political ambitions and his desire to, have that Ataturk image and to become a sort of American-style president, it is striking that both the peace process 1.0 and 2.0 have seemed to me, at least, to have been initiatives of the AKP. And so I guess I just wanted, in general, your interpretation of that. Given that, in reference to the framing that you began your talk with, the AKP, or Erdogan, if you like, seems to be one of the few actors that treat this Kurdish problem as both a matter of civil liberties and a security matter. So in some sense, they synthesize or span that divide that you began with. Secondly, and more generally, I really appreciate the emphasis that you put on how you frame the question and even the sort of language of the question, or the grammar of the question. And in that spirit, I'm actually looking at a book that's here on the table, in fact. You didn't talk much about açılım, democratic açılım, but of course, and that's of course part of 1.0 perhaps as well. But what was so striking to me at that moment was the way in which this concept of açılım, or opening, migrated so quickly to other domains that didn't have to do with Turkey's Kurds at all, so that you had Alevi açılımı, you had Jaferi açılımı, you had eşcinsel açılımı. So you might say that that's a sort of leftist framing of civil liberties more generally, but it is an interesting sort of moment at which you have the Kurdish problem being subsumed within the problem of liberalism in Turkey and the Turkish state's relationship to liberalism more generally. So I just wondered your thoughts on that.
Excellent. I mean, I agree, and they're very, very relevant and central questions. About the Kurdish opening turning into democratic opening in general, I think in any debate with regard to what's going to happen with the Kurds, the main position is that when you do something on the Kurds, other components will also demand the same thing. That's generally the rationale of Turkish nationalism, or the mindset of the old center, meaning center periphery. Now, I think AKP decided to push on that democratic açılım because it didn't. First it originated as Kurdish opening, Kürt açılımı, and when it became Kürt açılımı, when you think about how AK Party makes decisions, which is basically 51% Erdogan making decisions, or maybe more than 51%. You have to understand that they rely overwhelmingly on opinion surveys that are made only for the government, and they're not, leaked to the public or, sent to the newspapers. So they realized how unpopular calling this Kürt açılımı became. So that's why they sort of expanded, on other, items of, liberal politics, not necessarily knowing what to do. The reason why Kürt açılımı became democratic açılımı was simply as a reaction to the fact that Turkish people were very annoyed that there was an açılım specifically for the Kurds. And that would be my take on it. It wasn't really a very, liberal and terribly democratic consideration. It was, preempting Abdullah Öcalan's peace process. And while doing that, calling this a Kurdish peace process freaked out everyone, and that's why it became a greater thing. But how much that larger framework accomplished anything is subject to another debate, because you realize that although that democratic açılım was, that democratic açılım ended when those PKK operatives went from the mountains. And the process was initiated because of the Kurds, and it ended because of the Kurds as well. So even though it's a democratic açılım, you always have this over and undertones of Kurdishness in the process. With regard to AK Party defining it as a security and civil liberties issue,